Okay, welcome to Chapter 1. First thing we're going to do is run through some of the new features found in Cubase 8.5 and just get a brief overview of those. I'm going to focus on the ones primarily of interest to a musician working in a home studio environment. There are some high-end things like presets for different users that a professional studio would use if they're bringing in multiple engineers throughout the day. We'll leave that stuff for the factory videos. One of the first things that's gotten tuned up is the ruler itself. If I put the cursor up, the mouse here up over the ruler, you'll see that it now divides into two sections, that lighter colored top section and the darker colored lower section. If you click that top section, you'll notice the purple cycle record function becomes active. And this, and of course, if you turn it on and off with the traditional button, you get the same colorization. And that it's a nice, quick visual reminder that you're in cycle mode, and it gives you the ability to turn it on and off right there. The lower part of the ruler, you can click and drag to scale. It still works like it always has. So a couple of things to note. First, the new capability is there. And second, you now have to handle the ruler a little more carefully. Otherwise, you'll end up turning cycle recording mode on and off when you don't mean to. Another enhancement that they've included with 8.5 is the ability to call up your different panes simply by moving the mouse to the side of the window. So if I move the mouse to the right, this flyout appears and gives me the ability to turn on the racks function. And racks have been around since version 7. And this is simply duplicating the functionality previously found in the window pane tool up here in the corner. So instead of having to return to the corner every time, you can just move the mouse to the side and enable racks right there. Then, of course, this is subdivided into two tabs, VST Instruments and Media Bay, and you'll see that Media Bay's gotten a facelift. There's now a much more streamlined icon-driven menu here. And so if I select Instruments, you get a nice, quick visual guide of all the VST instruments there. And what's really cool is if you click on one of them, say Groove Agent, then it's going to take you right to the sound libraries for that instrument. And then if I come back up to the top and I move over, I highlight the word Instruments again, click there, I could go in and say, start seeing content for Loop Mash or the Pad Shop libraries that we have installed. It gives you a quick visual way to tunnel down to the content for each instrument without all the other clutter there, which is handy. So let's come back home. Same thing you'll see under Loops and Samples. If you select that, you now have a cover flow presentation for all of your different loop libraries and so forth. Similar to maybe iTunes and some other more visually oriented navigation that's become standard. Then come back home one more time. You can see under the More icon, you have your track presets and so forth. The one thing you may wonder is, well, where's all the rest of the Media Bay content? So if you come to the Home button, then move over to where it says Show All Items and click there. Now you have sort of a soup to nuts presentation of all the content that you would get, similar to if you opened up Media Bay using the traditional drop down. So as long as we're in here, something else that's handy is they've let me get something to preview here. Previously, if you took a piece of audio from Media Bay and you drug it into your program and let go, it would create a new track down here at the bottom of all your existing track structure. You can now take that piece of media from the Media Bay tab, drag it in, and then as you notice the mouse moving up and down the track inspector list, or rather the track list, wherever that green highlighted bar is shown, that's where it's going to insert the new track at the intersection of that green line and wherever your cursor position happens to be at the moment that you release. So it's sped things up a little bit. Instead of having to create the new track at the bottom and then drag it up where you want it, you can do all that in one shot. As far as the flyouts here, let me put the racks away for just a moment. One thing I would caution Mac users about is if you come down towards the bottom, this is going to happen more often than not. You'll get your dock to pop up instead of the it's down here. The chord pad tool is hiding down there. And again, nested tabs inside of that. And we'll look briefly at the chord pads later when we talk about the VST instruments and so forth. For right now, I would just caution you that you're going to have one of two things happen. You'll either be looking for your dock and end up with the chord pads, or be trying to enable the chord pad tool and get the dock to fly up. That's just a kind of a touch thing. I think the more you use it, the easier that becomes. Then on the left here is our inspector tool, and at the top is the ability to turn on your various info and overview lines. And again, if you're having trouble getting to the right spot in the screen until you learn the hotspot, you can always come back over here to the window pane tool and just simply turn everything on and off there like you always did. Let's take a quick look at the VST Instruments tab. There's one addition here that kind of got brushed under the carpet in the various press releases, and that is the upgrade to Retrolog. Retrolog is now Retrolog 2, and its first version was kind of I thought a Prophet 5, Sequential Circuits Prophet 5 type instrument, and they've fattened it up so it's more like a Pro 10 or a Prophet 10 now. You've got, if you're familiar with Retrolog, you'll see already you've got an extra oscillator here. The matrix is has a little more depth to it, and they've added additional LFO capability. So the same basic flavor and feel is still there as in the first Retrolog, but it's got just a lot more capability. And in fact, if we come back home here, go to Instruments, and then select Retrolog, you'll see that you now have the Retrolog factory content and the Retrolog 2 content included in the VST stuff that comes with the program. So a couple of other aspects to speed things up here. Let's create a new track. And in Chapter 2, we'll get into the different track types in detail. We'll get into connections and track types. But when you create an audio track now, or any track, you have the ability to name it during the process of creating it. And this is really handy. You can set the routing right here as well. Now, because I'm working just with the internal audio on the computer for the purpose of these videos, I don't have a whole lot of busing set up. But if you had, say, a 5.1 surround bus system enabled, you could come in here and pick out exactly where you wanted it to go. And that's not really new capability, but previously you'd create the audio track, then you'd have to select it, open it, and rename it. Then you'd have to select it, open it, and reroute it. Lots of repetitive steps. You can knock that all out here in one shot. And if you're adding the instrument tracks, let me get the right menu up here. You have the ability to pick the VST instrument right there and so forth, how many you want and so on. And with effects tracks, you can now name the track and adjust its routing and so forth, and whether you want it in or outside of an effects track folder right from the initial dialog box here. So that speeds all kinds of stuff up. Move in a little closer now grabbing the bottom part of that ruler and dragging so you can get a better look here. If you select an audio part, MIDI part, any of these have them, you'll notice there's a new handle. In previous versions, of course, you have fade in and fade out handles at the top. You've got a handle in the middle for overall volume adjustment, and then trimming. I'll turn off snap here real quick, sorry. The ability to trim it, that's been there right along. But this guy in the center of the right-hand side is the duplicate hotspot. If you click and drag there, it's going to make multiple copies. Let me zoom out just a little bit so you can get a better sense of that. So previously, you could select something and you could use the copy position and paste. Obviously, that still works. Then we had the ability in version, I think it was 6.5 and on, you select a piece of audio and you can hit Command D to duplicate them, which is handy. Back out of that. But now to prevent, you can do it just with the mouse by simply clicking and dragging on that duplicate hotspot, and you can make all sorts of stuff there. And it works with MIDI tracks and stuff too. So depending on what your workflow is, if you're working with loops and chunks and putting stuff together, that can be a real handy way to build stuff out in a hurry. Let's jump to export just for a minute. Take a quick look ahead now. We're going to deal with exporting and file formats and all that stuff in detail in Chapter 11. But just for the moment, to give you kind of a preview here, they've added a naming scheme button that gives this, calls up this window, and now you can click and drag your various attributes into the workspace here, the result, to determine the name of the exported file. So if I bring name down, and then the channel type, channel name, etc. If you look in the very bottom, you see a preview. Every time I add a variable to the result line, it's showing you how that's going to look down below. Uh, and again, it all how useful this is going to depend on what sort of work you're doing and for whom. But this is a real quick way to get the information you need into the file name, and you can see right there in the preview line exactly what that exported file is going to look like. Then the last thing I want to preview here just briefly is this new menu, VST Cloud, and the associated VST Transit. Now, this is brand new in 8.5, and this is another collaboration tool. And the last chapter of this whole video series, we're going to talk about the collaboration tools in greater detail, to include taking Media Bay with you on a thumb drive when you go to another facility. Of course, VST Connect, which is fantastic if you've got rock solid internet, a lot of bandwidth, and really high speed. That's the real-time video exchange capability. And if you've tried to use that at all, and it can be challenging. When it works, great, it's phenomenal. But unless you have, like I said, absolutely rock solid bandwidth and connection speed, VST Connect can be frustrating. VST Transit, by comparison, is more of a cloud-based. It's not real-time. So this will work even if you've got a sketchy internet connection. And essentially, you're going to log on and set up your credentials. Your collaboration partners are going to do the same. And then you can park projects in the cloud, and you can pull them down and work on them. They can pull them down and work on them, and then swap the results back and forth. So it's very cool. I think it's going to have a much broader audience because you don't have to have just super duper connectivity to make it function. So we'll look at that in great deal when we get into, I say, the last chapter of the series here, chapter 12. And most of the other new features, like I said, are sort of administrative in nature. And unless you were working in a fully professional environment with multiple engineers throughout the day, or you're doing a lot of very in-depth editing with the Project Logical Editor, they're either not going to apply to you, or the others, like the new time stretch algorithm. It's great, but it's transparent. You can basically stretch audio now to almost unlimited amounts of stretch or crush without incurring a lot of artifacts. It's very cool, and the science behind it is neat, but it's largely transparent if you're just doing musical stuff. So we'll save that for another presentation another time. So those are the basics. As we go through all of the functions in these different chapters, we're going to touch on these new features as well as the stuff that's always been there. So let's get going with chapter 2. We're going to look at how to get you set up, hooked up, and go through the various track types.